Chapter 9 of the Hilter Chronicles. This chapter is called Moonstone Gallows. A purple smear faded to black in eastern skies, while countless spiders' eyes started to blink over Vigrid plains. A spectacular flower arrangement of violet eels and jade dragons sailed over a sea of soldiers colliding into each other. Fountains of blue blood fertilized the muddy grass, and cartfuls of limbs cluttered the solid salmon snow. King Ogni's lack of resolve and leadership ran his army into the ground. His legendary iron gloves were weighing him down. And if it weren't for all the falling berserkers defending him to the very end, his glorious battle would have been over in a blink. He was enraged enough to want to drink his enemy's blood, but all he could think of was gold floating down the river. Led by King Jarl and Bjorn, the Helheim army split into a two-headed hydra, snapping at Vanaheim from both sides. The confusion of two simultaneous attacks disrupted King Ogni's straight path momentum. The disorganized villagers of Vanaheim soon lost sight of their king as the two heads of Helheim's white dragon fractured the enemy's defenses and weakened the walls around the king. King Ogni was soon surrounded by Helheim's forces, which beheaded Vanaheim's determination to go through with this pointless war. The warriors of Helheim, with their half-painted white faces, were just as spent as Vanaheim's, but they were like wolves around a wounded animal and clanged their swords and shields around the captured king. King Jarl dismounted his horse and slammed his death hammer through the head of a dismembered Norseman in spasms. He watched King Ogni swinging his sword like a cornered elk desperately swaying its antlers. "Our foolish sons brought us together on this red night," said Njal. "I didn't expect to find you in my way." "Great minds think alike," replied Ogni, facing Helheim's ruler. "Old fools, too. We'll see who has outsmarted the other when all is said and done." "When you are dead and done, we will see, won't we?" said Njal, raising his hammer. King Ogni quickly inspected the bloodthirsty crowd and knew his time had come. "It won't be long now, Skuld. Wait till I paint your faces red, you bunch of half-baked snowdrops," yelled Ogni, wielding his dang slave sword in his mind like the feared young wolf he used to be. He dived forwards, aiming his arch-enemy's head with the sword that was said to cause wounds that never healed. King Jarl easily stepped aside and didn't even use his hammer to smash Ogni's spine as the defeated man fell to his knees. King Jarl threw Ogni's helmet to the roaring crowd and gripped Ogni's hair. In a last spurt of hubris, the latter tried to break Njal's legs with his iron gloves. landing a devastating punch to the shins. The iron gripper fell to pieces. An infuriated King Jarl drew his sword and lopped off Ogni's head. The war was over, and all of Vanaheim's lost souls knew what was coming. From out of the ring of Helheim warriors came forth King Jarl on his stallion. The depleted Vanaheim troops stepped back, preparing for their last cruel night. With a booming voice, the king addressed the vanquished.
Men and women of Vanaheim, your king is with the gods.
He cried, flinging Ogni's head to their feet.
After so many winters, I almost can't recall why this feud began. And to add insult to injury, the iron gripper gloves were nothing but junk. The death hammer, however,
He said, swinging his massive weapon,
overshadows all. Nevertheless, the war is over. I see in your eyes that you are ready to leave us for Valhalla. But I have another suggestion.
Jarl waited for the agitated sea of anguished faces to calm down. When it finally did, he added,
Are you not tired of this sour rivalry? Have you not felt this way since our glorious island was halved and quartered? Under this waning moon that promises new beginnings, I offer you shelter under the realm of Helheim. As of tonight, I rename our beloved home the Isle of Helheim. And whoever wishes to help it thrive as we mend our wounds and prepare to conquer new worlds, I solemnly declare, you are free to go. Bend the knee, and I will grant you a better life.
The Helheim warriors weren't too pleased with their king's speech, but they had had enough bloodshed for a few decades of war and let their leader dictate the rules.
Long live Helheim!
Cried his brother-in-law.
Long live the king!
The victorious crowds woke the gods with thunderous cries. Vanaheim's men and women admitted defeat and fell to the ground in submission. King Ogni saw a deer fade away into the distant woods. The woods disappeared too, and no Valkyrie came to drag him to Valhalla. The gibbous moon was low in the sky. Too late to reach the Princess of Vanaheim in time, Hedil met his father's scattered army walking home. All the resisting forces had been slaughtered, and Helheim's forces were eager to rejoice. Luckily for them, it wasn't a full moon, and the killjoy Gothi would not be there to welcome them. Hedil searched the battlefield, hoping he wouldn't find the king's daughter. Freya came to halt beside the headless body of King Ogni. Vadir! Vadir! Screamed Hilda, jumping off her horse. She She had never cried so hard in all her life. She sobbed over his corpse, holding his scarred hands, still wearing fragments of the counterfeit iron gripper gloves. Freya walked up to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. He knelt before her and placed Ogni's head in its right place. Hilda snarled. Why didn't the Huldra bring him back? Freya, tell them to bring him back now! Freya shook his head.
The Order of the Mist is dead. No Norn monarchs left.
For fuck's sake, do something, Huldra! Hilda's utter sorrow was quickly turning sour. This rude awakening was not at all to her liking. After so much scheming and toying with the folk of the forest, all they had to offer was bitterness and despair. And my own family didn't even care what happened to me. Worse, my own father didn't bother to wait for my strategic expertise. To hell with everyone. A cushioned sound of someone calling her name grew louder and louder until someone else grabbed her by the shoulders. Hilda! Hilda! You're not dead, cried Hedil. Hilda slapped his hands away in fright and scuffled out of his reach. No, not you, she said with bloodshot eyes. What do you mean? Are you hurt, my pale raven? I came to save you. Leave me alone, Hedil. Touching his skin, she had felt a blend of utmost disgust and weird attraction at the same time. I can't deal with you now. Go home and celebrate my Fadir's beheading with your fucking king. Hedil hadn't paid attention to King Ogni's corpse lying on the melting salmon snow between them. He lowered his head in shame and paid his respects. Fuck your condolences and fuck you! Hilda got up and told Freyr to switch to his fjord shape. Freyr was offended by her previous remarks, but couldn't dismay his loyalty to this child he had watched over for so many summers. Hedil gulped as the huge man mutated into a horse that Hilda swiftly mounted. Don't leave me, Hilda. We can be together now. I love you. Hilda felt bile flood her throat. When you see your loving parents, ask them where they found you. Freya, to the wells. What do you mean? Thought Hedil, watching Hilda ride off towards Nebelwood. Assuming his pale raven was under shock from the death of her father, he decided to give her some space. He also decided to carry the king to a well-known location to prepare his remains for a proper underground ship burial when Hilda chose to return to him. This mephitic battlefield was not a worthy dwelling place for one of Hilda's kin, and the raven statue site would be more befitting. She would appreciate that, I hope. Before the first Muspelheim cockerel crowed to the western sunrise, a mangy gerfalcon landed near one of the castle's arrow slits. A perch was conveniently fitted there, and the bird of prey dropped a slice onto a metal pan which indicated an incoming message. A sleepy guard heard the notification, but did not read the tiny scroll and brought it directly to the king's quarters. The Bailey sentinel gave the king's door a gentle rap, and the grunting he heard in response sounded like an invitation to enter. What an embarrassing blunder! He immediately turned on a dime in the opposite direction to a wanton scene he wished he had never laid eyes on, that included aurochs horns, 3 oily Muspelheim maidens, and a supple intoxicated King Radgrid wearing a wild boar skull mask. Without bothering to cease his activities, the king sarcastically asked what the fuss was about. The falcon missive wasn't of any interest to Radgrid, who made the guard read it aloud to the 4 people entangled in bed. Your Majesty, the King of Muspelheim, Vanaheim has fallen. King Jarl proclaims himself ruler of the Isle of Helheim. Signed A. One of the women whimpered as Radgrid bit her shoulder.
The bloody nerve. Curse you, Jarl.
The king groaned when hot beeswax was poured into the visible part of an oily aurochs horn.
That will be all. Thank you. I will inform Harald myself about the wedding delay with Astrid of Njal.
The sentinel bowed and shut the door as quickly as he could, allowing the early bird acrobatics to come to an end. Muspelheim Castle was built on a small peninsula facing the northern sea. A natural barricade of slimy black rocks stood between the imposing structure and the sea's cavalry of mammoth waves. It was at sunset that the brown edifice earned its name, when the western sun rays gilded the wooden walls of the Golden Eyrie. A perfect nest for the Muspelheim firebird emblem. Harold stood on a balcony and admired the eastern shipyard, where beautiful dracars were ready to be engraved with the finest designs depicting his realm's history. He turned to the northern horizon and watched huge chunks of ice split and fall from melting icebergs into the ferocious waves. He leaned on the balcony's cold timber and imagined a fleet of enemy dragars approaching from the west. Had there not been such an impassable deadly sea surrounding 2/3 of the peninsula, the castle's wooden structure would have proved to be a poor defensive choice of material. Under siege from such a nautical invasion, the Eyrie would have been burnt to a cinder, only to be reborn again.
Harald, up bright and early. Well done,
said King Radgrid, chewing a drumstick from last night's feast. I wouldn't call this morning, uncle. I was just thinking of possible renovations to the castle, said Harald, sitting at the outdoor table. Radgrid poured himself a horn of ale and ignored a swelling headache.
Fire away. What did you have in mind, young lad?
I was wondering if we shouldn't actually finish building this castle. When lightning strikes,
Raise the pikes?
said Radgrid, raising his horn of ale. Very amusing. If Odin grants us another lightning bolt, we would be sitting ducks, the time it would take for the Eyrie to rise from its ashes.
That happened a long time ago, Harald. Touch wood.
Perhaps, but we live in precarious times, wouldn't you agree? Said Harald, getting a stiff neck from looking up to the king, still standing. You wouldn't mind sitting down, would you, uncle?
I prefer to feel the iodized wind pound my chest in the morning.
It's the afternoon, uncle.
Oh, who cares? So if I get your subtle innuendo here, you would have me butcher this work of art by smothering it in stone? Is that it? Your ancestors would have your head on a pike if I let you go through with this idea.
Uncle, our ancestor King Gorm had originally planned a stone fortification around the wooden ribcage. It was only an accumulation of unfortunate circumstances that led his vision to be postponed.
Are you lecturing me, Harald? The last thing I need right now is a history lesson. I know off by heart.
The last thing you need, my king, is a refill. King Radgrid frowned at his nephew, playfully, and refilled his aurochs horn.
You do know we'd have to rename this lump of timber something silly like Whale's Bottom or Boring Grey Tooth.
I like the ring to that, laughed Harald. Although we could paint the stone walls in gold, you know.
Oh, could we? Our gold coffers might be bulging, but not to that extent. The mines have almost run dry anyway.
We could stick very fine layers of gold onto the walls. Or we could see if diluted gold paint does the trick.
Harald, I admire your industrious mind, but please, put a sock in it, would you? I have something that needs saying.
Harald didn't take the news too badly, since he had never met Astrid of Helheim and had no recollection of ever dying in her arms beyond the white walls of Helheim. What did bother him was being right about needing to reinforce their defenses. If King Radgrid didn't willingly capitulate, the weight of 2 united realms would shortly fall upon them. With all that in mind, Harald made a suggestion. What if we didn't wait like whipped dogs for King Jarl's official request for Muspelheim's unconditional rendition? What if we didn't wait for their wounds to heal and storm their castle right away?
Young wolf, I think I should grow a pair of eyes in the back of my skull with you around. I do agree, though. We should invite ourselves for supper, but not quite yet. My falcons tell me that the gothy moon faces have a habit of dropping by every full moon. Their exhausting presence is said to last all day and night, and ends in orgies and blood.
Uncle, you're dribbling at the mouth.
Anyhow, if we strike next full moon, they'll be sure to have their pants down and aurochs full.
That would mean waiting nearly a whole moon phase, Uncle. They will have had time to recuperate.
Harold, my lad, when the war has been won, you would be surprised how invigorated an army suddenly becomes. The victorious warrior taps into hidden pockets of energy that make celebrating the closest thing we'll get to Valhalla in these harrowing lands. All blasphemy apart, letting them believe all has returned to normal would give us the upper hand.
True. And what if we dressed up as priests and walked straight through their gates? The king and queen welcoming us with open arms.
For Odin's sake,
Cried the king, rubbing his nephew's head with his knuckles.
Aren't you the little genius? I think it's time we went on a tactical camping trip to the hills. I feel lost, and my soul needs cleansing.
Praise money and soul. Hildur, Svadir, and Modir were no more. She had painfully found out that Hedil was her half-brother, and she had to live with a festering memory of killing her lover's real mother, another Huldra, who knew Skegald, a close friend. Vanaheim had crumbled without her insight, and nobody gave a damn if she were alive or riddled with maggots. Once again, she peered into the blue flames of the howling cauldron. The calling voices were louder than usual and made Sune's voice difficult to hear. If you've made up your mind, Hilda, you must choose, he said coldly. Skuld's death was hard to swallow, and if she didn't complete the ritual soon, the Trogs wouldn't wait for his permission to slay the perfidious princess. You implied that Orphan Webs was worse than drowning in the blue flames. Have you actually spoken to anyone who was returned from the second well? Sune wasn't sure if he would see Voluspa ever again. Should he tell her? He needed to trust Hilda, despite her despicable crimes. Even though he knew her soul was tormented, and her motivations weren't entirely magnanimous. My mother was the Shadow Norn monarch of Orphan Webs, he whispered, shutting off all thoughts as well as he could. She did it for the survival of the Huldra. Without the Ordor, and now Bestla missing, Voluspa somehow held us all together. And what did she have to do? When the Black Waters are where you have decided to go, I will tell you, said Sune. All right, be that way. Down the cauldron it is. Despite not caring what would happen to her, she was still hit by a wave of doubt when peering into the well. Would she snap her neck when she fell to the bottom? What did she have to sacrifice? And in exchange for what?
Careful what you wish for.
She remembered her father once saying. Sune had forbidden himself from showing any signs of compassion towards the murderer of the Second Well's future monarch. But couldn't help it. He held Hilda's hand and helped her over the edge. The flames weren't as cold as they used to be. The tingling warmth around her legs was inviting, while the choir of sirens was now unbearable. Sune saw her still hesitating as she sat on the howling cauldron's edge. The thought of Skuld's premature demise erased all childhood sentimentality, and he shoved Hilda into the well. She screamed out in disbelief, and her plaintive eyes rapidly vanished into the flames. The sensation of not being able to breathe was an experience that Hilda had not hoped to reiterate so soon. Her lungs burned until she gave in and inhaled the blue fire, which grew colder as she fell. With a final gasp, the freezing fire filled her throat and flooded her lungs, while the siren choir sang her name. The navy blue darkness was sucked away, and Hilda was struck by nauseating dizziness, and her organs ceased to work. In complete sudden silence, her body dropped onto the shores of an elliptic blue lake. The first time she drowned, Hilda resurfaced in Milkwell. This time she was stung back to life by such a repugnant smell. She screamed in terror. Hilda was stuck in a grotesque, flaccid substance that seemed to be some sort of slippery, dark fungus. She writhed and twisted to get out of the gluey surface and tried to hold on to one of the many broken pikes and spears dug into the mire. Her fingers were too oily to grip onto it for long and kept sliding back down whenever it gave way under her weight, tilting downwards with a click. All she could see above was a flickering blue sky, the lapis blue lake down below, and this horrendous grey slope made of hell knows what. Hell. A subsonic wailing filled the festering funnel. She panicked when she realized she had landed on mountains of rotting corpses, slushy banks littered with mangled flesh and bones. She held on to a rubbery root to lever herself up, but Hilda felt it squirm. The root was somebody's arm, and she kicked and screamed to get away from it.
Be careful what you wish for.
Hilda finally pulled her way out of the bilious mush, only to instantly regret it when she started to slip towards the lake. The cold, sodden limbs and the limp skulls stroked her back as she slid through the sordid grease. Grabbing a large branch before falling into the lake, she yanked her shoulder so hard she dislocated it. She gripped her two hands together around the rotting wood and cried, "Vadir, I'm so sorry for all I have done. Idil." She wanted everything to end, but she didn't want to drown again. The huge huge femur bone she was clinging to split to pieces, and small violet worms poured over her hands, wriggling towards her. She let go. Underwater, the taste was fouler than the cadaverous stench. Her stomach instantaneously spewed out everything it could, and Hilda swallowed the cloud of filth back into her lungs, slowly putting an end to her misery. The sound of squidgy mud spatter and the familiar putrid smell pulled Hilda out of her brief slumber. Understanding where she was again, trapped in rancid guts and bones, Hilda screamed in despair to the blue sky as she felt herself slipping down the sadistic slope once more. Was this her never-ending punishment? To drown for eternity in the bowels of the howling cauldron? The war was over. Vanaheim had lost. Some warriors would be remembered for their bravery and might in battle. Some would be forgotten like sudden hailstones in spring. Others might be reminded of their cowardice. Asmund knew he had let his father down for the last time. With Prince Asmund riding at King Ogni's side, as the king had always wanted, surely the battle of the brave would have ended otherwise. Helheim hadn't even slaughtered or raped the villagers. The town hadn't been ransacked or burnt down, and instead Vanaheim had been gifted mercy for their allegiance to their new king. King Jarl had allowed Asmund to live out of the kindness of his heart, or perhaps so the utter defeat could be remembered for generations to come. Not a wise long-term strategy. But Asmund had no fight left in him for vengeance. He didn't even have the courage to ride into Helheim and rescue Kyoko. Because of her, he had lost everything. Even Eleonora was dead, the life sucked out of her in the woodland prison. And Hilda was missing. How ashamed he felt. Maybe Hilda was right. Kyoko might have cast a hideous curse upon Vanaheim after all, and he would have to live with the consequences. The day after the battle that he did not take part in, Asmund felt it was his duty to bury his stepmother. The watching raven statues would be the perfect place. Unfortunately, he had been informed that Prince Hedil was on location, building a burial boat for King Ogni. Even his enemy had been there for his father. Perhaps he could bury me alongside you, Fadir. I will not fight back. Onto his horse, Asmund strapped Eleonora's lightweight body, wrapped in a tapestry of past glory that the queen had woven herself. When Asmund tried to mount his stallion, there was a tremor in the ground beneath his feet. His ride grew anxious. and couldn't keep still. As he tried to calm the horse, a sudden commotion roused up in the woods. Hundreds of wild boars came crushing through the undergrowth. Hares and deer followed, while flocks of birds burst into the sky. Asmund held on to his horse with all his strength as the animal kingdom poured out onto the plains. A relative silence settled when the terrified beasts were all out of sight. Asmund's horse was still agitated, despite his deep, soothing voice and relaxing caresses, and he wondered what in hell had frightened them in Nebelwood. He decided he wouldn't stick around to find out, and took off for Elivargar River. Asmund galloped around Nebelwood Forest and through the clutter of yesteryear's wars. He remembered being sent away to find new lands to conquer, instead of standing by the king to defeat the other two realms, and he couldn't understand why he had accepted. Spoiled and weak. A murder of crows interrupted his misery with a rising sound of alarm they sometimes made when a hawk or predator entered their airspace. They cawed so loud he couldn't hear himself think. That was precisely when the earth shuddered. Asmund thought one of the Nibelungen mountains had just crumbled, or someone had felled the great ash tree. The ongoing tremors shook the trees so hard they appeared to be moving, and the startled crows painted the sky black. Asmund's horse doddered, and Eleanor's corpse fell onto the muddy grass. The prince thought he was going mad. Hell was about to swallow him up. Then the shaking stopped. Asmund felt a chill run up his neck. The gods did exist. He made a prayer to Odin and quickly attached his stepmother to his horse. He rode away at a canter, in awe of what had just occurred. Beside the heavy flow of Elivargar River, one of the 9 raven statues had fallen and cracked in two. Another raven was now covered in runes beside what seemed to be a recent grave. Next to the latter, in front of a third sculpture, a massive hole had been excavated in the peaty ground. Hedil used the rope to pull up pails of soil he had filled to empty the cavity, designed to fit an entire ship. Hedil's horse warned him of someone approaching, although the young prince was an easy target at the bottom of the hole he was digging. A dark head appeared from over the edge, masked by the glare of the sun. Without bothering to address the man who was desecrating his father's land, Asmund turned around and went to get Eleanor, placing her stiff body in front of another raven. Hedil gingerly climbed the ladder that his men had brought to him with a cart full of other digging equipment. He peeked over the edge and felt a needle of shock to see Hilder's brother, who would come to bury someone in the exact same spot. I expect you want retribution, son of Ogni, said Hedil, wiping off the earth from his clothes. Your father fought bravely, I was told.
He died an honorable death, a pointless one.
But here we are, replied Asmund.
Do you want to bury me beside my father? Do you take pride in burying the defeated?
I am doing this for Hilda and out of respect for a great man.
Where is she? Did you kill her too?
Thankfully she survived the battle, but her heart was broken when she found out what was left of King Ogni. She fled to the woods.
I wonder where you go, little Hilda, to find solace in Nebelwood.
I do too. I'm worried about her.
You should know by now that worrying about Hilda isn't necessary.
Hedin nodded and put on some leather gloves to drag up another pail of earth. Now that you are here, perhaps you'd like to help? If the prospect of working with the man you nearly killed the day before doesn't bother you. Asmund stared at the wrapped-up corpse of his father. A warm wind slalomed through the watchful ravens, and he thought about gifting King Ogni a sacrificial lamb before burying him. A welcome dowry from his arch-enemy.
A lot of good that would do, wouldn't it, Fadir?
He thought.
If you don't run away again, I would be honored.
Hedil returned a mild smile and emptied a bucketful of earth. At sunset, flocks of starlings sinuously raided the skies like worms of ashes, shape-shifting with ease to the rhythm of a silent symphony. Beneath the snake of birds, a horse and cart trundled over the fields towards Elivargar River, where the two men were still digging. At least Hedil and Asmund hadn't murdered each other, and piles of earth now surrounded the huge pit. They were both too exhausted to notice the cartwheel's squeaky approach, and jumped when Kyoko stood above them, dyed in red from the setting sun. As broken as Asmund was, he couldn't help but feel a net of spikes capture his heart and squeeze it tight. Hedil broke the silence. Thank you for coming. I see you bring us some relief. The falcon said that Asmund was here, so I came, replied Kyoko walking back to the cart where sat her unusually silent friend Astrid, who motioned her to return to the grave. Asmund gave Hedil a dubious frown.
When did you find the time to dispatch a falcon? Have one up your sleeve for every occasion?
A magician never reveals his tricks. Go on up there, you fool.
I will, to fetch my sword, you coward,
said Asmund, who had no intention of confronting Kyoko yet. He ignored the woman from the eastern storms and continued to dig. Hedil rolled his eyes and kept up the hard work. Later that evening, when the sun was just a vague memory, and larger stars were now surrounded by carpets of speckled light, the two grave diggers drank warm soup, while Astrid and Kyoko added wood to the fire. After another uncomfortable silence, Astrid broke the ice. You know, Prince Asmund, or whatever I should call you now, we should travel north and ask Muspel's Harald to design a fabulous ship for your father. He would have no objections in constructing a royal drakkar worthy of a king.
For the king of Vanaheim. Thank you, Princess Astrid of Bjorn and Estrid, but I doubt a ship from one of my father's enemies, however fabulously designed it may be, would be very tasteful. Besides, I owe it to the king to build it myself.
With the help of another enemy, said Hedil. But even I admit that asking Muspelheim for favors right now would not be auspicious. Our ties with the Golden Area are unclear, to say the least. Harald wouldn't mind, I'm sure of it. But your loss if you wish to sweat it out together, said Astrid, raising her eyebrows. Will you be burying the queen with your father, Asmund? Asked Kyoko timidly. Asmund didn't reply, but got up in a huff to carry his stepmother to the pit, where Ogni was also lying. He refused any help and climbed down the ladder with Eleonora over his shoulder. To protect her from scavengers, Asmund covered her wrapped body with stones like he'd done for Ogni, temporarily until the boat was complete. When he returned to the others, Astrid had put out the fire and was ready to leave, holding the reins of the strong fjord horse. Asmund was about to reprimand her when Hedil said, Since we have no carpenter tools, proper dried wood, or manpower, would you not like to call it a day, Prince Asmund, and come home with us? Please, allow yourself time to mourn and design a divine drakkar as my guest. In my lodgings, for Kyoko's sake. Kyoko lowered her head and shed a tear. Asmund didn't care anymore and hugged her head against his chest.
I'm sorry for everything.
Kyoko held his great worn hands and whispered something to his heart. Until the next disaster. All four left King Ogni and Queen Eleonora to rest in their unfinished tomb, ironically right next to the fresh grave of Skuld, Hedil's mother. Earlier on, while the two men were working hand in hand, Kyoko had heard Skuld's ghostly whispers. She was glad to see the two brothers faithfully burying their mutual father together, although Kyoko didn't know what she really meant. A few days before the full pink moon, King Radgrid and a squad of 16 Muspelheimers stealthily approached the Gothic sacred settlement in Moonstone Hills. The waxing gibbous moon didn't bother them. Clad in charcoal-blackened tunics, and they used the nocturnal light to their advantage. The pale-faced priests already stuck out like a sore thumb, but their lunar-illuminated face paint only made it easier to spot them in the dark. Radgrid wasn't much of a religious man, and he certainly wasn't as fanatical as this lot. He cared less than his loyal subjects about Odin's wrath or Sol's displeasure related to this unholy intrusion, and he had his personal motives for disliking the Gothi. Before Harald was born, Radgrid loved to be out in the wilderness. He loved his wife, Sigrid, almost as much as his brother's wife, who bore the same name, and he would often drag the former out on his expeditions along the coast beyond Nibelungen Mountains and in the hills. On one trip to Moonstone Hills, the royal couple had rested on a hot summer's afternoon in the middle of a small meadow, surrounded by white-painted boulders. They had spent too long roasting their sweaty bodies in the scorching sun, but didn't have time to regret the sunburn when they were clobbered unconscious by the white-robed Gothi. King Radgrid remembered every last grueling part of his short stay with the worshippers of Mani and Sol. He despised their mantras, the way they smelled, the sickly tone of their sanctimonious voices.
You two, follow my lead. The others encircle the village,
whispered the king, sneaking between two mud huts. He could see sacrificial slabs and trees in the courtyard, a circular pond, and several dogs chewing bones. One of the priests was sleeping on the floor near the entrance to a central temple. Radgrid picked up a rock and took care of the priest with a cracking blow to the head. Faint choirs of distasteful voices emanated through the temple doors. Another Gothi priest bumped through a door behind them and puked white fluid onto the dusty floor. One of Radgrid's assassins slit his throat and dragged him back into his stinking hut. When she came back out, the woman was dressed in the dead man's white robes. Radgrid signaled to those in hiding to storm the other huts and to retrieve their costumes without staining them too much. When the soldiers bashed through the hut doors, a small dog began to bark, ferociously defending what seemed to be a human tibia. The singing stopped. King Radgrid saw his Sigrid strung up by the ankles, hanging upside down in that very same temple. When the dog had been silenced and the soldiers were fully dressed in white, he ordered them to quietly advance through the temple doors and creep down the spiral steps. He almost had everything he needed to attack Helheim, but that wouldn't be enough. The pots of white paint down below wouldn't be either. Chanting resumed below Moonstone Hills. In a domed cavern that was blackened with charcoal, a congregation of barefooted Gothi priests walked anti-clockwise around a circular stone altar, pausing whenever a half-Gothi minister spoke the sacred texts. These high priests wore yellow robes that wavered like candle flames in the light of 9 torches. The 9 half-Gothi stood with their backs to pale steps that led up to a roofless gazebo. One of their corrupt acolytes was being reminded of his sacred vows and the path to redemption. He was chained up to 9 pillars and hung over a hole, a deep chasm where sweaty drops of desperation would fall. In turn, the honey-yellow half-Gothi ministers raised their arms to make a lunar form with their cupped hands. Each one would summon the moon-shaped crowd to stop walking, to absorb the holy words that the ministers boomed out of their lowered hands.
Sol, shed our sins and expose our soiled hubris.
Sol, blind the flocks and inflame their foul lies.
Sol, brand our tongues so it solely speaks your wisdom. Sol, drink our water and deliver us from craving.
Sol, eat our flesh and retrieve the gift you gave us. Sol, kiss the moon and bereave us of all doubt.
Many be the torch that reminds us of the truth. Many cleanse the rotten and the tainted with compassion. Many drown the sleepless with your sanctifying gaze.
While a few drops of filtered water could be heard tapping onto the eroded stone-white floor, a smaller half-Gothi minister hissed and brought the cavern to silence. He faced the sorry victim and slowly turned an iron wheel that lowered the man into the dark hole beneath him. The priests praised Mani and Sol 9 times, and the screaming sinner was hoisted back up. Another Hofgothi raised his arms and resumed the prayers.
Many wash our hands that fulfill your retribution. Many paint our faces with the purity of soul.
King Radgrid's men tiptoed down the spiral steps, and the chanting grew louder. Another scream brought back haunting memories to the revengeful king. He touched his fiery belt that cast a hardly perceptible orange glow, and drew his firebird sword with its gilt runes and jagged teeth. When the king reached the last step at the back of the cavern, he saw his late wife, legs and arms spread apart with chains. A clay funnel was placed between her thighs, and the coffee filled her womb with molten lead. The liquid soaked through her body like a hot knife through butter, and eventually dripped from her mouth, nostrils, and eyes. Unlike the first time, when Radgrid was forced to watch while chained to a wall with other kidnapped devotees ready to be brainwashed, he stormed into the cavern and hacked his way forwards through anything alive standing before him and his imaginary wife. The disrupted singing came to a crashing halt, and the alarmed Hofgothi commanded their priests in white to capture the intruders. To their dismay, a horde of white-robed renegades poured out of the spiral staircase and tore through the assembly, slashing their way to the leaders. Despite the hindrance of bodies packed together, the task of overpowering the unarmed Gothic crowd was swiftly achieved. Soon a blade was under every Hofgothi neck, and all priests were forced to surrender. That didn't stop King Radgrid, who couldn't slow down his murderous onslaught, ripping through throats and thoraxes with enraged determination. He cracked through the ribs of one Hofgothi minister who had already surrendered, and had trouble pulling his sword out of the woman's chest, using a boot to yank the jagged firebird out, painting a swelling red sun in the yellow robe. Radgrid dragged the wailing minister to the hall and kicked her down into the depths of torment where so many had fallen over the countless seasons. King Radgrid pulled at the rusty chains frantically and tried to pull his Sigrid down to safety. The poor man in chains, with scorched eye sockets and flayed skin, dropped onto the bloody floor and writhed like a hooked worm. When the king's vision faded, he was left with the nightmare of flesh and bones shivering before him. King Radgrid put the man out of his misery and ordered his soldiers to tie the ministers in chains and place them on their knees around the hole. The king strolled over to a furnace where the lead was being melted and filled a heavy stone bucket full of silvery white liquid.
You putrid sods have been praying for so long, you've forgotten how to purify your own tainted souls. Now let me show you,
said the king. The priests who hadn't been slaughtered lethargically watched the king easily carry the molten lead back to the mouth of hell. Most of them looked ill. They were gaunt and poorly built. Some appeared to be delirious, biting their nails feverishly or obsessively rubbing their faces in circles. Few seemed shocked, however, by the sudden bloodbath, and none looked too concerned by the inauspicious fate of their half-gothy spiritual guides. The king plonked the crucible next to one minister who'd already wet his robes.
You don't remember me, do you? You don't remember my irresistible Sigrid either, I expect.
The half-gothy shrugged.
That doesn't matter. Your ugly mug is unfortunately branded in my brain, and I see no other ritual that would suit you better than the one you gracefully gifted, Sigrid.
The king requested a stone ladle from beside the furnace.
Firstly, in the name of Goddess Sol, I hereby grant you a few sanctified drops to help you reflect in the dark upon your foul existence.
The king dipped the ladle into the crucible and filled it with hot white lead. Two frenzied soldiers held the minister's head back, and the king poured a thin thread of metal into his eyes. They sizzled and disintegrated into a smelly mush of blood and lead.
Now, in the name of your forgiving god, Mani, I hereby shed you of any audible distractions. Your lamentations will suffice for others to enjoy, and you may recall the thousands of voices from your victims while we prepare you for your next sentence.
Radgrid dipped the dagger into the boiling liquid and used it to melt through the half-gothy's eardrums. When all ministers had been prepared for King Radgrid's final punishment, the Ring of Eight tortured half-gothy started to sing a mournful elegy of Mani and Sol. His eyes and made two of his men fetch another hotter crucible.
I despise you all, you so-called priests of our beloved gods. I will hate you from here to Valhalla for soiling the purity of the sun and moon, two constants in our lives that Sigrid adored so much. Now you can stuff your chants and open wide for your final judgment. Your inner purification remedy has arrived.
Radgrid's soldiers used pokers and daggers to force the minister's jaws open and waited for their king's orders.
Praise Mani and Sol, my old friends, in the depths of hell.
The king lifted the second crucible over his head and poured out the molten lead down their throats, enlarging their steaming mouths considerably and forever silencing every half-gothy butcher, one by one. The screams seemed to endlessly echo off every rock and brick of the dark cavern. A haunting breeze crept out of the hole behind the dead ministers, like a ghostly hand reaching out to take them home. King Radgrid stared at the mummified ministers, but the satisfaction of their appalling deaths felt insufficient. He decided not to dump the leaders into the pit and nodded towards the Gothy prisoners.
Count yourselves lucky,
He said, grabbing one of the pale-faced priests by the hood and tossing him down the chasm. The other Muspelheimers followed the king's lead, and when the last hellish cry was swallowed by the pit, only the 8 fuming morbid statues remained. Radgrid told his men where to find the white lead pots of paint in one of the far-end cellars, and stared into the darkness of the deadly pit. His lively spirit had drifted away, and all he had left was gloom and spite.
you're next, Njal.
See you next time for chapter 10 of the Hilda Chronicles.